Story number 1. Lost in the Grand Canyon. In 2009, my brother and I decided to take a trip to Las Vegas to go and celebrate his birthday. Our plan was to stay there for 5 days, checking out the sights, as well as celebrating my brother's special day. He was turning 21 years old this weekend, so we thought, what better way to celebrate? The celebrations were fun and all, but after spending 3 days there, we got pretty bored. This was when we came up with the plan of going to the Grand Canyon. Sure, it was a detour we would have to take, considering we live in Southern California, but since we were still on spring break, we could afford to spend some time out there. Little did we know the adventure that would be awaiting us, though. We end up leaving on Saturday evening, and we make the drive over to Arizona. This was during the winter time, so there was fresh snow waiting for us as soon as we stepped out of the car. Now let me tell you, the air out there, it was so clean. It was honestly like you were in a different world. Anyways, we check into our motel for that evening and we go to sleep excited for the adventure the next day. The plan was to go and check out a place called Eagle Point. If you've ever been to the Grand Canyon, then you know it's a pretty popular destination. So, next morning after breakfast, we get in our RV and we make a 30-minute drive until we see an RV parking area. Once there, we get some of our camping supplies in our backpack and we begin preparing what we would need to bring with us. Extra food, plenty of water, blankets, you get the idea. Now, before making our way down into the canyon, we ended up checking some details at a nearby park ranger station. We talked to a couple of the park rangers on duty, and they reminded us of the areas to avoid, as well as giving us the general rundown of the park. Me being the worrisome one, I ended up writing down the phone number for their station, just in case we would need their help. Important detail, by the way. With that, we started making our way down into the valley. Wow, what a sight to see, I'll tell you. I can remember how much everything changed as we started to make our way down. The rivers and valleys below were now starting to come into better view, and you could actually see the ground. Of course, getting down there wasn't exactly the easiest thing for me to do. I guess I did forget to mention that myself and heights, well, we don't exactly work together. So you can imagine I was pretty much glued to my brother the entire time. Still, I decided to man up and deal with it until we reached the bottom. When we reached the bottom of the valley, we actually saw a couple of campers who had their little campsite set up. They called over to us and we actually ended up talking with them for a while. One thing they did tell us was to be on the lookout for the mysterious stranger. We were of course unsure what they were speaking of, but they told us that some campers had their things taken. From the looks of it, the husband and the wife weren't exactly unprepared. We could see that the husband was packing some serious heat, so we knew they had to be serious about it. Either way, we thanked them for the information, and we continue on our so-called adventure. Weird, don't you think? I mean, do you really think they're telling the truth about there being some mysterious person out here? I don't know. But did you see what they were packing? Yeah, you could stop an elephant with that thing. It's nice to know that they're on our side, though. We soon put the encounter with those two behind us as we continued along our way. I don't remember at what point it was, but I do remember it was right around sunset. By this point, we'd found ourselves a place to set up camp and were relaxing. Suddenly out of nowhere, we started hearing noises approaching us from the distance. Soon, we are face to face with this person we've never seen before. He was wearing a traditional outfit and everything, which was actually pretty neat to see, but at the same time, it was weird. Confused by his sudden appearance, we watched as he walked over to us, and then we said, "Hello? Was there something we could do for you, sir?" At first he doesn't say much, but then he finally speaks up and says, "Don't mind me. I'm actually a native of these parts. I was just checking up to see what the two of you were up to." I'm not sure, but the way he spoke had my brother and I a bit on the edge. Sure, he seemed friendly, but at the same time, it almost seemed like something else was going on. It's like somewhere in the tone of his voice, you could tell he knew something that he wasn't telling us. Regardless, he soon gets up and just leaves without saying another word. Talk about strange. At this point, my brother and I are almost considering leaving, but it being dark, we didn't want to walk out there knowing somebody might be waiting for us. Still, I think the nerves got to us, because about 20 minutes later, we decided to pack our things and make the walk out. Man, what an experience that was. Walking around in that canyon at night was like having a blindfold on your face. Sure, we had our little lights and all, but that wasn't helping, especially when every shadow appeared to be moving closer to you. I digress. Moving on. We are continuing our 2-hour journey until eventually we ended up realizing something. The trail we were supposed to take to get up wasn't in front of us anymore. See, us being the naive 20-something-year-olds we were, we decided not to bring a map of any kind. We were honestly just relying on our memory, and with it being dark out here, that memory was pretty much useless. We were looking for a series of rock formations that we ended up calling the Big Wedding Cake, because it looked like one of those cakes you would see at a wedding. Yeah, weird analogy, but that's what we came up with. Also, next to it was a little pond with a couple of trees that formed a Y. Yeah, we were now officially lost. Surely it couldn't get any worse, could it? Please, don't even get me started. This was when we finally had the great idea of getting on the phone and trying to call for park rangers. Yup, you guessed it, no connection whatsoever. Well, now we had no choice but to once again set up camp and wait until the morning. Mind you, it's now about 2 a.m. and the nerves that kept us up for hours were finally starting to peter out. So, we set up camp and ended up falling asleep after hours of uncertainty. Now, during the night, I did become aware of what sounded like footsteps, but I ignored it thinking I was just imagining things. Fast forward to about 5 hours later. It's now I'd say 7:30 a.m., and we're starting to wake up to what sounds like yelling and arguing off in the distance. Confused by it, we ended up waking up to see what all the commotion was about. We exit the tent, but at first we don't see anyone. We do, however, see what look to be the tracks of what appear to be a large cat around our tent. Obviously, those weren't there when we got there. Guess what we happened to see further up ahead of us? Remember that rock formation I'd mentioned a bit earlier? Yeah, it had been here the entire time, but I guess with it being so dark, we couldn't really see it too well. I should mention that was also where the couple from the other day was. Well, we started making our way over there, when all of a sudden, we started to hear this really loud pop sound, and it echoed throughout the canyon. I'll admit, that was enough to get us to run for cover behind some rocks. Once everything had settled down, we are soon welcomed with the sight of the couple from the other night. Now they're beginning to walk over to where we were hiding. We called out to them, and they soon told us what had happened. Here's more or less how the conversation went. Hey, you two kids okay? I hope they didn't get to you. Didn't what get to us? What do you mean? The mountain lions. They didn't head this way, did they? No, sir, we didn't see any mountain lions. Why? What happened? Well, my wife and I were fast asleep in her tent when we suddenly started hearing the sounds of footsteps outside her tent. Needless to say, I woke up and looked out the tent, and I was face to face with 2 adult mountain lions. They ended up grabbing my backpack and taking her food with them, and that's when you heard the loud warning sounds I made with my good little trusty friend of mine. So that explained why he had done that. Relieved that we had finally found our way nonetheless, they ended up joining us on our way back to the canyon. And that was pretty much it. Honestly, it was such a crazy experience, but what really got to us were a couple of things. For starters, who was that man we had seen on that night? And also, how close did we get to becoming dinner for the mountain lions? Surely those questions remained unsolved, and it's something we still think about from time to time. Story number 2. The Unidentified Noises. You know which stories I really enjoy the most? It's the ones that remain unsolved. Perhaps it's because of the mystery behind them, or maybe it's because you're left scratching your head trying to come up with a logical explanation. This is the best way for me to describe what I experienced almost a year ago. As a side note, I've mentioned this to a couple of people, and even though we have some ideas, I thought perhaps I could get some feedback from all of you. Please, some serious ideas would be greatly appreciated. Okay, so a couple of years ago during winter break, I decided to go on a little road trip. Let me go ahead and explain something about this road trip. Originally, I had returned home for the winter break to go and visit my family in San Francisco. You see, I moved to Southern California for college to attend Cal State Fullerton in Orange County. That university was perfect for me because it offered a wonderful business program that I was really interested with. My father owned his own clothing business, and I was looking to expand his work by learning as much as I could. After all, his business would be mine one day. Anyways, I'd spent New Year's with my family, enjoying the wonderful food, as well as the countless hours of talking with relatives that I hadn't seen in years. About a week before returning back home, I actually came up with a great idea. See, I was planning on visiting Yosemite National Park at another time, but I figured since I was already in Northern California, why not make a quick trip there before returning back to my dorm in Southern California? After all, I still had 2 weeks of vacation, and chances are I was going to spend that time bored in my dorm room. With the plan set in motion, I leave my parents' house and I started my new adventure to Yosemite National Park. Hours later, I arrive in a small town called Mariposa, where I ended up staying at a small inn. Fun fact, Mariposa in Spanish means butterfly. Moving forward, after spending the night there, I ended up driving over to the actual national park, and I began a daytime walk in there. I was actually planning on just staying out there for the day, but after all the hours I spent taking pictures, I knew I wanted to get pictures of the sunrise. Therefore, I ended up returning back to my car to pick up a tent I had in the back. Hours later, it's now 8 p.m., and I'm enjoying some s'mores and some hot chocolate I brought with me. I lose track of time, but I did become aware of some movement further up ahead of me in the woods. Confused by it, I ended up calling out, only to have a couple walk over to me. "Hey there, don't mind us. We're just looking for a place to set up our camp. Hey, do you mind if we could set up our campsite next to you? It's always great to meet new friends." They seemed pretty friendly. Himself and who I'm guessing was his girlfriend looked to be a couple of years older than myself. With that, they set their campsite up about 100 feet from mine. They were actually pretty nice because they invited me over to their campsite for some dinner. While enjoying some dinner and talking to my new friends, we each became aware of this sudden loud yelling. I don't even know how to begin describing what the yelling sounded like. It was like the mix of an animal and a woman screaming. It seriously got to each of us, and we even thought that perhaps somebody was in trouble. But what really added to our questions was also seeing what looked to be the outline of somebody running off into the distance. "You don't think somebody might need our help, do you?" "I'm sure it's just a wild animal. Forget about it." Things did seem to settle down after that, and we each returned to our tents. I won't lie, I was on high alert the entire night because I really did become concerned about the noise. I don't think the other guy wanted to admit it, but I think even he could tell there was something wrong with the scream. Like I said, it didn't sound like a noise you would just hear a person make. I actually tried calling using my phone to call officers, but of course, there was no signal. Either way, I was really tired from the entire day of being up, so I just ended up falling asleep. Some time later, it's about 3 a.m., and I wake up needing to use the restroom. I step outside and I find a place to do my business. As I do so, I couldn't help but get this sudden sensation that I was being watched. I don't know, it's really hard to explain. I'm sure those of you who've ever gone camping or you've been in the middle of nowhere, well, you know what I'm talking about. It's like suddenly all your senses become focused on this one little important detail that makes you feel like you're not alone. A bit on the edge, I start making my way back until I heard a sudden noise behind me. I turn around, and all of a sudden, I'm face to face with a person in a dark hoodie. Obviously, with no source of light, I couldn't even tell who they were, but it was enough to send me running back to the tent in absolute concern. With the commotion, my neighbors ended up stepping out of their tent. "Dude, what's the deal? Why are you yelling for? Can't you see we're trying to sleep?" I explained to them what I had seen, and instantly, he goes silent. "So, you're not joking, are you?" "No, I'm telling you the truth. Why?" "Okay, yesterday we also saw somebody in a dark hoodie, but they were just staring at us from afar. I only realized it when my wife pointed him out to me. Needless to say, it was one of the reasons we had decided to change our location." Now, having someone just stare over at your campsite was one thing. Not knowing what his intentions were another thing. It also didn't help that we heard the screaming. Was it possible that he had taken someone with him and they were hiding out in the woods where nobody would find them? I'm not exactly too sure, but we didn't see him nor hear the noises after that again. The next morning, we talked to the park rangers about it, and they told us others had reported hearing the screaming and seeing the strange man in the hoodie. Even so, all they were able to find was some leftover tape, jacket, a cable, and a rundown tent about half a mile from where we were staying. Regardless, I tried checking to see if there were any reports of anybody missing or unsolved cases, but I haven't been able to find anything regarding it. Story number 3. What we saw remains a mystery. This is the very first time I'm telling this series of encounters to such a vast audience. I'm not exactly sure how to start this off. I guess I should start off by saying that my wife and I have no idea what we saw or what we heard. Realize that I'm not looking for fame, and I would gain nothing from lying about this. I really just want to tell this tale because I truly believe it's worth sharing. For some background context, my wife and I love going on road trips every summer. Each year we always made plans to visit somewhere new. Being from a small town in Pennsylvania with a population of roughly 2,000, you can understand our need for adventure after seeing the same thing year round. This year was no different. So, when we left our home in late June, we were looking for yet another new place to explore. Some ideas we had were going to Disney World, the Grand Canyon, or Universal Studios in Hollywood. As exciting as each of those locations were, we had ultimately decided that we wanted to spend time out in the great outdoors. Therefore, we set out to go and visit the Glacier National Park in Montana. With its over 1 million acres of land and thousands of different animal and plant species, it was no wonder why we had chosen a national park as our ultimate destination. Alongside us, we'd also brought our 5-year-old German Shepherd named Henry, who would keep us company through our week-long trip. So, after a couple of days of driving, we arrive at a lodging center, where first thing we do is plan out how exactly we would begin to navigate this great open space. Ultimately, we had the help of some park rangers who showed us some of the most popular locations and sights to see. The park ranger told us there is a beautiful waterfall at the top of a mountainside that gives you the most amazing view you'll ever see. It sounded like a plan, so we figured we could go now so we could camp there and be there just in time for sunrise. While making our way up this series of trails, my wife began taking photos with her camera. See, she really loves nocturnal animals, so one thing she was looking for were owls. We hear a couple of them, and we do manage to take a couple of pictures. I should mention this now, but don't forget about the pictures she takes, because they're going to reveal something towards the end of the story. Anyways, as you might imagine, it being around 9 p.m., it was not only dark out here, but it was quiet. We did have powerful spotlights with us, so it wasn't really such a worry, and with Henry on our side, we felt confident in our nighttime walk. Something to note is that we only saw people at the lodging area, and we did see a couple of campfires close by the lodge, but nothing out here. We were at least 5 miles out into the wilderness by this point, and it was still. Eventually, we continue to follow this dirt path until we can hear the sounds of water. As we got closer to the source of the noise, we are able to see a waterfall and a river. That wasn't the only noise we heard, however. As we stood there listening to the sound of the water and admiring its beauty, we suddenly heard the most disturbing noise that we ever heard in our life. It sounded like somebody screaming, but it was like there was a filter to it. I'll admit, it was enough to have my wife and I do a double take and even caused Henry to begin to growl. Remember, apart from our lights and the moonlight above us, we are unable to see if something or someone might be hiding out here. Either way, things finally seemed to calm down as the noise suddenly disappeared just like that. Thinking it was just a wild animal, my wife and I forget about it and we soon begin heading up this small mountainside. Eventually, we reach an opening where finally, after hours of walking, we set up our camp and start a little campfire. At this point, it's about 10:30 p.m. and we're just wrapping up for the evening. Henry laid fast asleep next to me, and my wife and I looked up at the stars and recounted stories. At around 11 p.m., we finally call it a night, and we now head inside the tent. Fast forward to around 4 p.m., I suddenly wake up no longer able to sleep. I'm not sure if it was my nerves from earlier that kept me awake or what, but I figured to get my mind off of everything, I would walk around for a little bit. I figured since Henry was with the wife, he could keep an eye on her while I checked out what else there was to see here. So, I start off by continuing ascending this trail and heading further up into the mountain. From where we were camped, you were actually able to see another ledge that appeared to offer an even better view from where we were. What better way to surprise my wife than by taking the camera with me and taking pictures of the view? Now, I would like to add that as soon as I started heading further up the trail, I couldn't help but once again get that feeling of being watched. When I was about halfway up the incline, I take a look toward the ledge and I'm now able to see something standing there. I'm still a fair distance away, mind you, but I could see the outline of something tall standing on 2 feet. I initially thought that it was a bear, so I started to slowly step back as not to startle it. The only thing is, I don't know of any bears that stand on 2 feet for longer than 5 minutes. Whoever, or better yet, whatever was there, had been standing still without moving a single inch. All of a sudden, they let out an extremely loud yell, then they run off into the woods. That was enough for me, and immediately I head back to the campsite with an obvious worry over my wife and my dog. Understandably, they are confused as much as me when I wake them up and tell them what I had seen. Still, my wife thought I was joking, but I think she was trying to hide the fact she was believing me. In summary, we ended up packing up our things and going down to the lodging area. We didn't bother telling the park rangers because I had a feeling they wouldn't believe me. Trust me, a lot of people wouldn't believe me if it weren't for the pictures. Remember the ones I told you about earlier? Well, finally back at home we are going through the pictures we had taken, and we notice a couple of strange things. Obviously, we looked through the pictures of the actual road trip, but when we arrive to the pictures from that night, we are shocked at what we see. In one of the photographs, you can see one of the owls my wife got, but when you took a closer look at the bottom right corner, you could see what looked to be eyes staring back at us through the trees. Since my wife had the light on the camera on, it appeared the light was reflecting off their eyes, thus it was giving the illusion of them glowing. Our ideas were perhaps it was a wolf, or maybe a bear, but it didn't explain what I saw on that night later on. I still have the pictures if you want to see them. Just let me know and I can post them up later. Thanks. Story number 4. If it wasn't my mom, who was it then? This occurred back around 2015 when my family and I took a trip to a national park. This was actually our first time going, but I remember how excited I was. It was my mom, my dad, my little sister, and myself. This was the summer before I was going to start college, so it was set to be a fun adventure. Of course, like all these other stories, there had to be something that would ruin it. Even though it's obviously been a long time, I'm going to do the best I can to give as many details. So, we ended up staying at a little cabin for a day that was essentially out there in the middle of the wilderness. At the time, there were a series of fairgrounds where families were able to rent cabins to stay for the night. Each cabin was, I would say, half a mile spread apart from another, and there were probably about 5 in the immediate area. When we arrived, each one of them had been empty according to the park rangers. Anyways, my family had rented one of these cabins for us to spend the weekend at. Right away on the first evening we arrived, I had this really bad feeling about the surrounding area. I guess it was because of how dark it got there. I mean, seriously, the only light there was from inside the buildings themselves, so unless you had another form of light, you were essentially walking blind. I'm sure you can tell where this is going. On one of these nights, I'd gotten pretty bored of just spending time with the family. Honestly, there's only so many rounds of Clue and Monopoly you could play until you got bored. See, another thing I forgot to mention was I just gone through a recent breakup of about 3 years, so even though I was spending time with the family, I wanted to be on my own for a while. That was why at around 11 p.m., once everybody had gone to sleep, I stepped outside and began walking. In that moment, I remember this lake I'd seen earlier in the day. It was about half a mile away from the cabin, and I wanted to go there to get my mind off of everything. So I start walking down this quiet trail and everything is normal, albeit it was pretty chilly that night, around 55 degrees. Eventually I reach the lake and I find a spot I sat down at, and that was next to a field of flowers. There I am, just looking at everything around me, trying my best to get everything off my mind. I forget how long I was there, but in my peripheral vision, I think I see what looks to be movement. I turn around, but there's nothing. Okay, well, maybe my mind was just playing tricks on me. I return back to looking at the lake. Fast forward about 20 minutes later, I take my phone out of my pocket and I see it's a little bit past midnight. I think now is a great time to start heading back, but as I do, I see something. You see, I managed to catch the glimpse of a figure just peeking from behind a tree, then hiding back behind it. I froze at that sight because it honestly looked like a person. That's when I let out a nervous laughter, thinking perhaps my dad had followed me out there. That's when I said, "Ha ha ha, really funny, Dad. You can come out from hiding now." There is no response. Now I really started to sweat. If it wasn't my dad, then who could it be? As far as I knew, there wasn't supposed to be anybody else out here. And besides, what are the chances of just running into somebody out here in the middle of nowhere? That pondering is broken when I'm finally able to hear sounded like somebody talking. I couldn't really understand what was being said, but it was definitely the sound of something. I don't know how to best describe it, but it's almost like somebody was speaking through some sort of filter. Also, there was this sudden smell of iron and even sewer. Not sure if that makes sense. I must be losing it, I tell myself, as I started making my way back using another trail that led to the same area. The walk is normal until once again the smell returns, only this time I can hear what sounded like my mom calling out to me. Yeah, I'm not even kidding. The thing is, it sounded like it was coming from behind me in the woods. Why my mom would be out there, I tell myself, I have no clue. Maybe she had woken up and saw I was missing, so maybe she went to look after me? That still didn't explain the smell. Well, instead of following her voice, I make it back to the cabin where I found my mom and dad just getting out of the cabin looking around. "There you are. Where in the world were you? You had us so worried." "Sorry, Mom. Sorry, Dad. I just wanted to get out and walk for a while." "Hey, Mom, how did you get here so fast? I heard you about a quarter mile away." "What are you talking about? We just barely exited the house. I never went into the woods." So if Mom wasn't out there, then why did I hear her voice and who was the one mimicking her? I'd tell them about it, but of course, they had no idea how to explain it. Either way, nothing happened the rest of the trip, and we returned later the next morning. Now I hand the question off to you. What in the world do you think it could have been? Story number 5. Strange Lights Out in the Wilderness. Hey there, everyone. How are you all doing? I have a story to share with all of you today that remains a mystery to me. Any and all ideas would be greatly appreciated. I live in Alaska, and I still do, and this happened about 10 years ago in the summer of 2008. I was camping in the Denali National Park, and I'd already spent a couple of days camping out there. With me, I had my Siberian Husky, who in this recollection we will call Teddy. Anyways, the days out there were very pleasant, and I can recall all the wonderful sights we saw as we explored further and further into the wilderness. This ended up happening on the night before I was set to leave. It was, I want to say, around 11 p.m., and I was in my tent reading a book. Teddy was next to me already asleep, and I had a little radio playing some music. Seemingly out of nowhere, it got all staticky. It was weird, but after I'd been doing that for a couple of minutes, I turned it off thinking perhaps the batteries were malfunctioning. I took this as a sign that now it's a great idea to get some sleep. So I put my book away and I try to get some shut-eye. About 2 hours later, it's around 1 a.m., and I'm awoken by a very bright light. Note that this tent was specifically made to stop light from coming in, so for there to be light was really confusing me. As I started to get up confused, first thing I noticed was Teddy was missing. Teddy is very protective of me, and he never leaves my side unless, of course, he needed to use the restroom. I disregarded the light and I wait for about 2 or 3 minutes expecting Teddy to return. The minutes go on, and still there's no Teddy. This was when I started to become a bit worried, so I finally step out of the tent and see what's going on. There are no signs of Teddy, but what I am able to see was a series of lights I'd say about a quarter of a mile away from where I was located. It was hard to tell due to all the cover of the trees. Intrigued by it, I thought perhaps Teddy had seen it and started heading toward it. As I get closer, however, I started realizing something. The lights were changing colors. A couple of seconds they were red, a couple of seconds later they were blue. Wait a minute, red and blue? Are there maybe officers out here? That's what I was trying to tell myself, but I didn't hear any people talking like I would have normally expected. Suddenly, I could hear barking behind me, and I saw that Teddy was finally meeting up with me. The thing is, he looked really distressed. It's almost like since the last time I saw him, something had happened to him and now he looked to be really nervous. This was starting to worry me, so I checked on him to make sure he wasn't hurt. Everything appeared to be normal until I pet his leg. It appeared to be swollen, and by the looks of it, it looked like he was actually hurt. I guess that would explain the way he walked over to me. Since he was hurt, my main priority now was taking care of Teddy, so I help him back to our campsite. Now, back at the campsite, I help him into the tent and I give him some treats to help him get his mind off the pain. It looked like he just had a sprain, so it wasn't anything too serious. What was serious, though, were the series of events that happened all within the next 30 minutes. Forgetting about the strange light I'd seen a bit earlier, I once again try to get some sleep, and it's only now that again the mysterious light started to brighten up my tent once again, and once I stepped outside, what I see surprises me. Through the trees, I could see the faint outline of something taking off, then flying into the distance. Remember, I was quite far from the original site of the light, so I couldn't tell if it was a helicopter or what it could be. I was confused because there wasn't really any sort of sound. It was like a low frequency. That wasn't what really remained a mystery to me. About 15 minutes later, I started hearing a familiar sound, actual helicopters. Annoyed by the constant interruptions, I step outside only to see a series of darkened helicopters flying off the same way I'd seen the strange lights from earlier. Okay, well maybe one of the bases was doing a test or something. I don't know. Soon after that, I'm able to see and hear a car approaching. Honestly, at this rate, we might as well have just left and gone back home with all the noise. Regardless, we soon meet up with some park rangers, and they're telling me we had to leave the area. Soon after that, I'm able to see and hear a car approaching. Honestly, at this rate, we might as well leave with all the noise. Regardless, we soon meet up with some park rangers, and they're telling us we have to leave the area. When wanting to know more, they weren't saying much. Not that it would matter, because even I think they were told the minimum. And that was pretty much the end of that. I never got answers, and I never found articles surrounding it. It's remained a mystery ever since.